Hi, I'm Pete Whitmarsh, Head of Paid Media at Search Laboratory. Today I'm going to be talking to you about advertising internationally with paid search, paid display and social media. I'm Pete, I'm the head of the paid media team. So just to give you a bit of my background, I've been at Search Laboratory for just over 5 years. Prior to that, I got a maths degree from the University of Manchester, and I was actually briefly a professional poker player, so that's kind of how I made my living before getting into the world of search. Today I'm going to be talking about biddable media. So what I mean by biddable media is really paid search, display advertising, and social advertising. So firstly, just concentrating on paid search. Why should you use paid search when entering a new country? There's a lot of good reasons why it's a really good way to market your business when entering a new territory. First and foremost, you can get some immediate exposure. So SEO, for example, is going to take a long time to kick in when you enter a new country, whereas PPC, immediately you can set up an AdWords account and you can start driving traffic to a website. It also helps you to verify the need for SEO. So if PPC isn't working for you, then there's very little point in investing time in SEO. You need to kind of prove that search works for you as a business before spending all that time and investment actually getting SEO working. So it verifies the need for that. It's also a great platform for testing. So it allows you to test all parts of the business. You know, it tests that overall kind of consumer journey. Are people actually going to buy your products in that particular country? Again, PPC, it's immediate. You can use it to test. You can also use it to test which keywords you should be ranking for on SEO when you do start that journey. And finally, it's relatively low cost. So certainly compared to a lot of other marketing channels, PPC can be quite affordable. Certainly if you're just dipping your toe in the water with a few keywords, then you can go in with really quite a low budget and just give that a bit of a try and see what happens. Just to emphasize the point of low cost, this graph here shows you the normalized cost per clicks in various countries. So on the right side there, you can see the USA is the highest cost per click. So as I say, this data is all normalized, so that's not $1, that's just sort of 100%, if you like. And all the rest of the countries are a percentage of that. So you can see, second to right, the UK is quite expensive. It's about 88% of the US's click costs. But actually, some other really well-developed markets have significantly cheaper click costs. So Germany, for example, is only about 70%. France is really low, about sort of 36%. So these are really big economies, really big countries, which could be a great territory to enter, but really cheap click costs. Of course, that's going to vary from industry to industry, from keyword to keyword. Completely depends on the competition, but just to give you an idea, these click costs can be a lot cheaper. Before even entering a market, there's a few bits of research you'd want to do. First and foremost, make sure you know which search engines you actually need to be on. Obviously, we all know about Google, and Google is the biggest search engine in the vast majority of countries. But in various other countries, there are other players to consider. So in China, Google's got a very small market presence. The big players there are Baidu, Haosu, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which used to be known as 360 Search, and Sogu. So yeah, if you're entering the Chinese market, you really need to be present on these search engines as opposed to Google. South Korea, Naver is the biggest. Russia, Yandex is the biggest. In Japan, Yahoo is the biggest. There's also in the Czech Republic, Seznam is the biggest. So there's other considerations beyond just Google. And each of these search engines work in roughly the same way as Google when it comes to paid search, but they do all have their own kind of nuances and special kind of features that they've got. Other considerations before entering a market, what I'd say to everyone is just do some searches. Actually go to Google or their local search engine, do some searches for keywords which you think would work for you, and see what comes up. See what the competition's doing, work out the kind of ad messages they're promoting, what their websites look like, what their delivery options are, or if it's a B2B service, how they collect leads, what kind of process a user would go through, and just kind of fathom out what the competition is actually doing there. You can also use search volume to really verify the opportunity. So to tell you, is there an opportunity in this market? If you realize that there's actually not many people searching in a particular market, then that might not only tell you that PPC isn't going to work for you, but it might tell you that actually your business isn't going to work very well in that particular country. If people aren't actively searching for those products, then maybe there isn't actually an opportunity there. One great tool which can help with this is the Google Global Market Finder tool. So this is a free tool. If you just do a search for it, you'll find it. It's got an input that looks a bit like this. You select your location and your language. You type in the keywords. So in this case, I've typed sheds. And you choose which countries you want to look at. So I've chosen the G20 here. And then what this does is it will automatically translate your keyword using Google Translate into a variety of different languages, and it'll give you the estimated search volumes in those languages. So, for example, with sheds here, you can see it's actually showing Indonesia as being the top opportunity there because there's 4,400 local monthly searches, which isn't massive, but actually the bid price is really cheap there, only 16p, and it's showing that there's basically no competition there. So if you were a sheds company looking for a new market, then perhaps Indonesia would be a good one to look into. So yeah, basically what this is doing is taking an opportunity score which is based on the search volume, the bids, and the competition in those territories. You do have to be a little careful with this. When I started drilling into this a little bit more, I noticed that Germany suggested Schuppen as a translation of sheds, and I can see my German colleagues down here having a bit of a giggle. Schuppen, basically, it's something to do with like shedding your hair, and it can basically be translated back into English as dandruff. So there's 9,900 people in Germany searching for dandruff. So just be a bit careful and make sure you do verify that they are the right translations. Alex briefly touched on Consumer Barometer, which is another Google tool which is really good for finding how people behave in various different territories. And I've pulled this data, which is similar to something that Alex had, but this is showing what would prevent people from making purchases in foreign countries. And you can see here the three top reasons why people wouldn't purchase from a foreign country. Firstly, because it hasn't ever occurred to them. Secondly, they assume it's more expensive. And thirdly, they assume returns would be difficult or costly. And you can see here, looking at these different countries, and you can pull any countries into this, into the Consumer Barometer tool. You can see places like South Korea, for example, by far their biggest concern is the fact that returns are going to be really difficult and costly. Whereas there's other countries, such as Indonesia, where it's just never occurred to them, or they assume it's going to be more expensive, but they're not so concerned about the returns. So again, make sure you're doing this research and make sure you're addressing those concerns that territory is likely to have. If you know that a particular territory is very concerned about returns, then make sure your product offering actually kind of suits that, and make sure that you're kind of really highlighting that in the ads and on the website. In terms of where to start, there's a few different theories here, but really what I would suggest, if you're entering a new country, you want to be thinking big, but actually starting small. So just start off with a few keywords, so a few things that you think really should work. So basically the keywords that really are the core of your business and really describe your product offering. Give those a try. If they work, then fantastic. You can expand from there. You can get some feedback from your customers from there, and you can work out where you need to improve, how to expand that, how to grow that. If they don't work, then I guess no harm done, that you're not going to have spent a fortune on those. And it also gives you some great data points to diagnose what hasn't worked there, to understand what you need to do to actually fix that for a user and start actually getting some sales in that country. One of the biggest points when it comes to internationalizing PPC is keyword localization, so getting that actual keyword list right. And Ian's kind of highlighted the point already as to why you don't just translate, and it's so important with keywords, and it's basically the reason why Search Laboratory was founded, is because Ian was working for a translation company. Occasionally people would come to him and say, can you translate our AdWords account? And Ian very quickly recognized that you don't want to just be translating an AdWords account, because actually people are searching in very different ways in different countries. And direct translation can actually lead to you missing loads of different terms. So if you're just doing a one-for-one translation of all the keywords in an account, then you're going to miss absolutely loads of potentially good terms from that. So just to emphasize that point a little further, What I've done here is I've started off with a German keyword list. So what I've taken is a good German keyword list, and I've translated that into English to really demonstrate why this direct translation approach isn't the best way to approach things. So this list here is all around the car hire industry. These are taken from the Google Search Planner with the help of one of our German linguists, and these are the best terms that you would want to target if you are a car hire company in Germany. These are the ones with the highest volume most people are searching for. If you do a direct translation of these, then you can see you get this list of English keywords, and all of these are good keywords. There's a bit of duplication in there, but ultimately these are good keywords that you probably would want to target in an English account. But when you actually look at the top keywords in English, so going through that same process that we initially went through in German to identify the top volume keywords, this is what comes up in English. So just to highlight some of those, the ones highlighted in yellow there actually don't appear in that list on the left. So even though you've taken a fantastic list of German keywords and done a good job of translating those, you can see you've missed almost all of those terms there. All you've got is car rental and rent-a-car. So car hire is missing, which is the biggest term. Also van hire is missing, so that kind of highlights how markets are a little bit different as well. Van hire isn't really a particularly big service in Germany, but in the UK it's a very big service. So again, you need to make sure you're not only localizing the keywords, but making sure that your product offering actually caters to those other markets. You also need to be a bit careful with ambiguous keywords. Imagine if you were to give a list of keywords to a translator and there's some ambiguity with exactly what those keywords mean. You could end up translating those into totally the wrong thing and end up attracting searches from a completely irrelevant audience. So just one example of that is the word jigsaw. If you do a search for the word jigsaw, you might be searching for any of these four things. So the fashion brand, a jigsaw puzzle, a jigsaw tool, or the villain from the Saw films. So yeah, if you're doing that search, if you had that as a keyword in your account, you'd need to be very, very careful when translating that, because you need to get the right translation. You don't want to be translating the wrong version of that. You also need to be very careful when translating ads. So back to the car hire example, these are some ads that I wrote in English, and they're decent enough ads. They kind of highlight some unique selling points, they tell you a bit about the company, they're relevant to what people might be searching for. And again, you might think this is a good ad, so let's translate this into another language. But actually translating these into German, you end up with these ridiculously long ads. So these are Google AdWords ads. Anyone who's familiar with AdWords will immediately be able to tell you they are far too long to fit within AdWords character count. So they're almost 50 characters, the last line in those ads. So these were the most compact, most concise translations that we could get, but still doesn't fit within that character count. So again, you need to be thinking about alternative ways to approach that. You can't just treat it as a translation exercise. You need to treat it as a sort of education, make sure the linguist knows about the company, make sure they know about AdWords, make sure they've kind of got all the knowledge that they need to be able to build these ads up from the ground up, really, and show relevant messages. There's also a lot of cultural considerations here. So different cultures respond very differently to different messages. So something that's not uncommon in the UK might be you'd have some kind of big flash sale, get 50% off, buy now. And that's really common in AdWords advertising, in all forms of advertising, really. But in certain countries, that kind of message would completely turn people off. It just isn't the kind of thing that they would respond to. So for example, whenever we work with our Russian team, the Russian team will tell us you cannot show a message like that in Russia because people want to know about the quality. They're very much focused on kind of the luxury and the sort of reliability of products, and they're actually not just looking for a cheap price, and that really, really wouldn't work well in Russia as well as a lot of other countries. Alex touched on things like designed and manufactured in the UK can be a fantastic selling point, and probably is in a lot of countries, but actually some countries don't particularly like the UK, so they might not actually respond very well to that message. And finally, a slightly more obvious one, but great gifts for Christmas. Of course, you've got to be considerate of kind of religious holidays and stuff like that. You don't want to go advertising that in a predominantly non-Christian country, I suppose. So just, again, be considerate about the sort of messages that you're showing. And again, you don't want to just translate your English messages because people will respond differently in other countries. Next, touching on the display and social side, again, just to look at why you should use display advertising and social advertising. Firstly, it's a great way of actually building a brand. So if you're entering a country for the first time, it's probably going to be the case that no one's really heard of your brand there. So display advertising can be a great way to get your name out there, show yourself to a really wide audience, and just kind of get noticed, get your name out there. It can also be really good for new product launches. So if you've got a product which is doing well in the UK, but actually people have never heard of this product and aren't aware of the concept of that product in other countries, then they're not going to be searching for that product. So you need to use things like display and social to actually get the product out there and make sure people are aware of that. And then that's what's going to start to generate searches and generate sales for you. Display and social can also be much more visual and interactive, so certainly display banners, you can have quite rich formats in there, you can even make them interactive, you can have video adverts as well, which work particularly well. So again, it's a good way for people to become a bit more accustomed with the brand than just seeing a text ad, for example. And also display and social advertising are really, really good for targeting a specific subset of people. So if you know who your audience is, if you know the exact kind of person that you want to be targeting in a new country, then display and social advertising really allow you to do that. So it can be great if you've got that in mind already. Certain considerations that you'd want to take into account though. Actually, your audience may be totally different. You may have completely sussed out your audience in the UK, but when entering a new country, that audience could be a completely different set of people. So, for example, we've got a client we work with who sells detox products, and in the UK, they're actually targeting quite young females. It's quite a fashionable product. It's something that kind of young fashion bloggers and health fanatics do as quite a trendy thing, I suppose. But in other countries, actually, that audience just doesn't exist around detox products. And if you're selling detox products over there, it might be it's a really kind of considered to be quite a pharmaceutical purchase, or it's really quite medical as opposed to kind of fashionable. So yeah, just take into account those kind of considerations. Is your audience actually going to be the same in these other countries? Everyone's heard about big data, I'm sure. It's one of those buzzwords that's been floating about for the last few years. And all it really means is there's lots of data in the world. And certainly with display advertising, we want to be leveraging that and using that to our advantage. But actually, we do have huge sets of data in places like the UK and the US. But in some other countries, that data set is more limited. So that means the actual audience list that you might be targeting could be a bit more limited. The number of people on social might be more limited. So bear this in mind and just consider what the alternatives might be if that data doesn't exist. You also need to think about publisher websites. So which websites do you actually want to show adverts on when it comes to display advertising? Typically in the UK, we'll have a whitelist and a blacklist. We're going to be showing we're going to be picking certain sites that we want to show ads on, and we're going to be picking certain sites that we don't want to show ads on. But of course, when you go into another country, you're going to have to start from scratch again with that whitelist and the blacklist. So you need to review those individual placements and make decisions on those. There's all sorts of examples out there. Most of them are quite crude, but I decided to take a slightly more funny one of potentially an unwanted placement, or potentially it's a really good placement. I don't know. If you can't read that, the headline, I'm not going to try and pronounce that word, anatidaphobia. It's the fear that you are being watched by a duck. And there's a company called Aflac who have a duck as their mascot. So yeah, there we go. Be a bit careful with the placements. So maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. If your brand already does have some presence in different countries, you want to consider how you might be perceived in those countries. So Superdry, for example, we've been told that actually Superdry, in the UK, it's quite a fashionable brand. In certain other countries, so Germany, for example, it's considered to be quite a sporty brand. And again, your audience is going to be quite different there if you're going after these sporty people rather than the sort of fashionistas. Clarks as well is a good example. I'm sure everyone's got a perception of who Clarks are in the UK. They're a decent footwear brand. Not got anything bad to say about them, but in Italy, Clarks are considered to be a really, really luxury brand. So actually Italians will pay a lot more for Clarks shoes than we will in the UK. And there's a real kind of quality emphasis on Clarks in Italy. So again, just consider how that actually affects your advertising strategy in those different countries. My final few things to touch on are website considerations. So firstly, this graph shows us smartphone penetration versus people out of those who own a smartphone who are actually willing to purchase on the smartphone. And there's some really interesting data here that there's certain countries where, such as like India and Indonesia in the middle, where there's a very low smartphone penetration, but actually out of those people who own smartphones, there's a real high propensity to buy products on there. There's some other countries where actually they've got quite a high smartphone penetration, but not such a good purchasing rate. So with this in mind, particularly if you're a retail website, you do need to bear in mind, where are my audience? If actually a big portion of your audience is going to be searching on mobile, you need to make sure your website caters to that. You need to make sure you're making the checkout process as seamless as possible and really just kind of catering to that mobile audience. I've got an interesting stat here, which is that in China, actually 15% of people use a computer more often than a smartphone, whereas in Japan, 12% of people use a smartphone more often than... Wait, have I got that the wrong way around? In China, 15% use a computer more often than a smartphone, whereas in Japan, 12% use a smartphone more often than a computer. So yeah, basically, there's a huge difference in that audience there. One market is very, very smartphone focused. The other market is very, very computer focused. So again, make sure all the advertising, all the website caters towards that. And when it comes to your website, Ian's kind of touched on some technical aspects of how to translate a website and how to localize a website. And as he said, there's more than just translation needed. So think about things like the fields in your forms. I'm sure a lot of us will have run into problems where you get to a checkout process and you've got to fill out a zip code. Just think about things like that. In Ireland, for example, they don't even have postcodes. So just bear in mind things like that and make sure your forms are actually fully localized. Make sure you're offering the correct payment options. As Ian said, Russia is kind of cash on delivery. Germany, they don't typically use credit cards. They'll generally use PayPal or something like that. So make sure you're using those local payment options. Get your images right. I've got an example of that next. Seasonality, make sure the products that are on sale in one country should be on sale in another country as well. And also just the general layout and busyness of a website, and I've got an example to highlight that. One thing that many of you may have seen is examples such as this. So this is a piece of eye tracking software which actually sees where people are looking on websites and how they navigate a website. And in the UK, we always get told people navigate in an F-shaped pattern. So you can kind of see that in these three examples here. You kind of going down the page and then across and across. So people navigate the website in an F-shaped pattern. But in different languages, particularly if you think of something like Arabic, where you're working from right to left, that is not going to be an F-shaped pattern. So you need to work out how the website layout should be different based on that kind of information. Just to emphasize the point of getting images correct, this is a company we used to work with who do video conferencing. On the left is their landing page in the US, and you can see there's some people kind of celebrating on this video conference. When we spoke to our French team about this, they said, you can't do that in France. People wouldn't celebrate in the workplace in France. I know I've got some French people in the audience, so I'm hoping I'm not going to offend anyone here. But this is what our French team told us anyway. So for the French market, we use this image instead, much more kind of sombre, much more professional looking image than the one in the US website. So as well as translating the website content, you need to make sure you're actually translating images as well. I mentioned about general layout and busyness of websites, and one example I found of a company doing this really well is actually KFC. So in Japan, we've found in the past that Japanese websites tend to be very, very busy, and that's how Japanese people like to browse the internet. It seems to really cater well to what they're looking for. But yeah, here you can see on the left is the UK KFC website, on the right is the Japanese KFC website. So this is a company that has really kind of understood that market, understood how people browse the internet differently. If I just scroll down, you'll see there's loads going on that website, whereas the one on the left is so simple. It's really minimalistic, so completely different approach. But yeah, that's a company who's really kind of taken this into account and really actually localized the website. It does go wrong for some companies as well. So sticking with KFC for a moment, when they first entered, I think it was the Chinese market, they tried to translate their slogan of finger licking good, and it actually accidentally got translated to eat your fingers off. So be a bit careful with the translation. Coors used to have a slogan of turn it loose, which translated into Spanish as suffer from diarrhea. And Electrolux are a Scandinavian company. When they first tried entering the English-speaking market, this was the slogan they used: nothing sucks like an Electrolux. So yeah, make sure you're getting these kind of things right. Be careful. Big companies make mistakes here. So just, yeah, make sure you are actually using kind of people with knowledge of that market. So just to summarize, there's a lot of ways that people get this wrong. You know, you've got to be aware of that, but don't let that put you off. There are a lot of ways to go wrong, but so long as you're using the right kind of partners and the right kind of people internally, then you should be able to get this right, but do be very careful. Start with baby steps and grow from there, so enter with a few keywords, see how it grows from that point. But most of all, just don't be afraid to try. So I've ended on a nice inspirational quote from Albert Einstein. Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. So, a bit cheesy, I know. So yeah, that's it from me.